So these are the topics. Again, I'm going to repeat them just because the recording just started. Why study in the US, deciding what to study, where to study, and the admissions process. These are all kind of very intertwined. They're all part of the whole big picture of applying to colleges and universities in the US. So let's start. First of all, as you can see this quote put out by the US Commercial Service, we have one of the largest systems of higher ed in the world. So there are so many, there's actually closer to 4,000 American colleges and universities if you include all the community colleges. And so there's a lot of options in the US. So depending on where you want to be in the US, what you want to study, what size school you want, there's going to be multiple options for you to look at in trying to make this decision about where to study in the US. First of all, though, let's look at why. So obviously, much like many countries, our degrees are recognized globally. We do have some very high-ranking institutions, and I think it's not just the ranking of the school as a national liberal arts or national research institution, but it's also other rankings. For example, Hope College is ranked in the top 40 in the nation for undergraduate research. So it's looking at some of those details about why schools are strong and how these strengths might help you as a student if you were there. So there's also the academic excellence. I think, again, like many countries, we have our share of schools that are very, very strong academically, and students come to us specifically for this reason. Excuse me. We do have options in all price ranges. I have a tickle in my throat, my apologies. We have options in all price ranges, so students, depending on their budget, again, you can find schools that will fit in that range of what you're able to pay. Everything from community colleges to private colleges to public universities. Hope is a liberal arts college, so we really feel that, and we only offer bachelor's degrees. And we feel that this liberal arts is really important to helping you prepare for the job market. It helps you understand people, deal with people, work with people, think critically, all of that kinds of skills that are very important. And even the big universities usually have some component of their degree that are like liberal arts or university program requirements. We do have the availability for you to do internships as part of your program. So, and it's not something you have to apply to the Immigration Service for. You can do that right through your international student advisor. And with many programs, especially in the STEM areas, the internships are a very important part of, but even in business, that would be another example. Even in business, internships can be a very important part of the process. We do a great job at our universities with career preparation. So we have offices on our campus that just specifically deal with careers and working with you to see what your calling is. What are you being called to do? What do you feel strong about? And helping students all the way through the process from first year to fourth year in preparing for that next step. And I think that's really what it's all about. You're going to get a great university experience, but really what you're preparing to do is move on to the next step, which is graduate school or a job, hopefully one of those two. And we're preparing you to help do that and get into some of the top graduate schools in the country. Again, with the graduate, we are providing, if you're coming for graduate studies, there's many areas of specialization, research opportunities that you would be looking at. So you can really go from the bachelor's, where it might be a degree in marketing, to maybe a graduate MBA in international marketing. So you're getting more specific at the graduate level potentially. So let's look at the other thing that we want to look is why. So why do you want to study? Why do you in particular want to study in the US? So part of it is the academic program and figuring out what it is that you actually want to study. So what's happening right now, if you're still in secondary school or you finished secondary school, or maybe you're in college or university right now, you're preparing for something. You're preparing to graduate and move on to the next step. So what kind of preparation are you getting, and how will it affect your ability to get into a US institution? So obviously we would tell any student to take the strongest academic program that they can, so that they can be considered for the best colleges and universities that we have available in the US. I encourage students to challenge themselves academically, but don't take such a strong curriculum that it then affects your grades. Like don't try to overachieve necessarily, because you want to have good grades as well. So you want to be in a program that you can do well in, but that also challenges you. And sometimes you don't have an option. Sometimes your program is what it is. So then it's important to just do the very best you can in the program that you are able to study in, like as a high school student or as a university student. So deciding what to study in terms of your academic interest, the US system is nice in that you don't have to know for sure what you're going to do when you arrive. So if you make applications to a university, you will be applying and saying you're interested in a certain major. And obviously you're choosing the university probably based on the fact that they do offer academic interest areas that are academic areas that you're interested in. But once you get to the US institution, you can change your mind. You don't have to stick with the one you thought you were coming for. We have students that come and start in biology, but then once they realize what the courses that are entailed and are required to get a biology major, they'll change to something else potentially. I mean, that could be the case with any major. You have that option of changing the major if you want while you're in the US. The thing is, you want to change that major early in the process, because the later you go, the more difficult it will be to graduate in 4 years. I think the academic interest is normally tied really closely with the professional interest. So for example, what is it that you ultimately want to do professionally? Do you want to be a researcher in biology? Well, that's a pretty easy one, in that you're probably going to do a bachelor's degree in biology, and you're going to get a lot of research experience so that you can maybe go on for a master's in biology and become a researcher. But there's other things like, for example, what if you wanted to work in the business field? Well, it doesn't mean that you have to have a business major. Or it could be that you do a business major combined with something else that will make you extremely marketable. Some people do business combined with a language. Some people will do business combined with sciences, for example, because they want to go work with a pharmaceutical firm, but they want to deal with the business side of the pharmaceutical firm, but yet having that knowledge in the sciences is going to make them more marketable to that business potentially. Sometimes there really isn't a magic major for that professional interest. In other words, there isn't one that you have to have, depending on the profession, but some professions don't dictate that you have to have a certain major. So that's where working with the advisor at the school, at the college or university that you attend in the US, working with them right from the beginning to say, this is what I want to do. And so how do I get there? Or it could be approached the opposite way. There was a student I worked with once who came in and said, well, I'm really strong in the sciences. I do love sciences, but I also love to draw. I feel like I'm a pretty good artist. I draw really well. And she showed me pictures, and I mean, she was very, very talented. But she said, I don't feel that I'm going to make enough money as an artist necessarily right now. So I need to look at my options. So she started, we brought in some faculty from the two areas, and I contacted them and said, hey, I've got a student that has these two interests. And so they started thinking of different ideas. And the one they came up with was, she could use her science and her art talent to be a medical illustrator. She could draw pictures from medical textbooks, which at the time it was on paper. But now it would be obviously more graphic design, or it would be done on computer. But nevertheless, the same concept. You take that love of science and the strong ability of art, and you put them together to lean toward a career that you probably never thought of. And there are so many careers out there that are like that. There's also so many careers that we haven't even thought of yet. Like by the time some of you, if you're in high school now, by the time some of you graduate from college, there will be careers then that we don't know about now. And that's based on the demand of the market, and also just new technologies that come up, and the need for workers in certain areas that we just don't need right now. So, and finally, probably actually the one most important that's early on in this process, could be number one on this list, is program availability. So if you know basically what it is that you want to do, does the school in the US or wherever you decide to study, does the school even offer that program? So you don't want to get really intense about looking at a school if you don't even know if they have your academic program, or do you know if that program is strong at that school? So it's important to kind of look into that and figure out what's available. Why is it strong there? What kind of opportunities do they offer you in that major, especially when you're thinking about the STEM fields where it's going to be more research oriented? Are you going to be able to do the research that you want to do there? Okay. So let's look at kind of the where. For some students, this is not a big deal. For other students, it is. So this is obviously a map of the US, and there are community colleges, private colleges, and public colleges or universities in all of our states, all across the US. If you've not been to the US, then you might not recognize the size. I'm not sure. Some people do, some people don't, but it is pretty big in terms of the distance between places. So if you can see my cursor, I'm right where Hope College is down here in the southwest corner of the state of Michigan, kind of the bottom of the mitten. We say that's kind of the shape of a mitten. So the bottom of the mitten. And then if we were in the southwest corner, and if I wanted to go a spring break trip or a vacation down to Disney World, for example, in Florida. So I'm right now in the West Michigan, and I'm going to go all the way down to this kind of central part of Florida. That's a 24-hour drive from West Michigan to Central Florida. That's 24 hours to drive that. If you're going to go out to California, it's even further than that. So that's why most people don't drive out there. They're going to fly. But there are locations. And the other thing I think that you need to take into consideration with the US is the difference in climate. So the southern part of the US, the bottom part of the US, and even out into the West, California, kind of across to Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, etc., that's going to be warm pretty much, all year, or at least temperate. It's not going to have a winter, so to speak. Whereas we're in Michigan, and then even the East Coast, so like Massachusetts and New York, so Boston, New York City, Baltimore, those cities, and then all the cities in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, we're going to get winter. So we're going to have winter that will be for anywhere from a couple months to maybe 4 months, maybe even 5 months if you're in the far north of the year. So in Michigan here, where we are on the lake shore, on the west side of Michigan, we're going to get a little bit of snow before you leave for the Christmas holidays, but there may not be any on the ground when you leave in December, may or may not be. If there is, it's very little. And then when you get back in January for the second semester, there typically is snow on the ground. And January and February are our primary winter months. Although certainly you're wearing winter clothing in part of November and into December. It's definitely, you'll need the winter clothing. But beautiful 4 seasons in Michigan. Students really seem to like it. We have students from here at Hope, and we have over 55 colleges and universities in Michigan. But we have students from all over the world here, and I can guarantee you that I've never seen a frozen international student in the winter. They all seem to survive it just fine. But we do have, even in the town of Holland, the city of Holland, which we're right next to, they have heated sidewalks as well. So they make winter walking there in the wintertime very easy because the sidewalks are heated, so it prevents the ice from building up in the winter. So that makes it really nice to walk downtown in the winter. It's really beautiful. So let's look at the types of universities in the US, because as I said, there's over 4,000 or around 4,000. So it's easy to make the right choice, but it's also kind of easy to make the wrong choice if you don't do the good research. So we have private and public, we have small and large, co-ed, single sex, research, liberal arts, and then semester, trimester, quarter. That's how they run their academic year. The most common being semesters. Private and public, there's no real difference between the two other than some of the funding for a public institution comes from the state government. But other than that, there's really no difference. Privates do tend to be smaller than publics, but again, it depends on the school. The size, small versus large. that's a personal preference. What kind of atmosphere would you rather be? When I say small, I say anywhere from, a school that has like 800 to, let's say, 5,000. That's kind of a small, the smaller end of the colleges. And I would say like the 5,000 to 20 or 25,000, that's considered, let's say 5 to 20, that's considered a medium size. And then above 20, that's kind of our larger public institutions. Obvious differences you're going to encounter is class size between big and small. Our class size is 14, our average size is 14 at Hope College. You may run into other larger university where the class size is closer to 20 or 22. But then the other part of that is, do they have any large lecture halls? So large universities might have a lecture hall that will have hundreds of students in it, and it's just for lecture. I mean, you go in there, listen to the lecture, and you leave. There's not that much interaction with faculty. But at a smaller school like Hope, for example, we don't have large lecture halls. And this would be the case with many small schools in the US. We don't have large lecture halls. We might have one that's like one that might be under 100. But even at that 75 or 80 mark or whatever, under 100, there is still interaction with the faculty member. Co-ed single sex, again, personal preference, whether you want to go to a school that has men and women or just one or the other. There are very few single sex institutions, but they are out there. Research versus liberal arts. Now that's simply meaning that is the university considered like a research one institution, which means they're really known for its research, which is great. But when they're known for the research in that regard, that research is being done typically at the graduate level, not the undergraduate level. So those that get that research one designation, if you ever see a school that says we're a research one institution, it's great. They're doing some great things. But that designation is basically because of the graduate research, not the undergraduate research. Liberal arts colleges like Hope, we do have some very, very strong research going on. Our students are presenting and doing research with faculty. So they're presenting and publishing with them. Whereas at a larger university, you might be doing research for a professor. Whereas at Hope or a small college, you're doing that with a professor. The difference is if you do it with somebody, then your name appears as an author or a presenter on that topic. If you're doing it for somebody, then only that lead researcher is the one that's getting the credit for the research. So those are just a few different things to think about, including the location that we already talked about and the weather. Those are all factors that might play in for you and may not. It just depends on what you feel the important factors are. So we mentioned earlier, community college a couple times, and I just wanted to show you kind of the pathway. So whether you're in secondary school now or if you're in a college university now, this is the pathway in the US. So we have a 4-year secondary school system, and then you have the option, and you would have this option too if you're coming to the US for college, of going to community college for up to 2 years and then transferring, or going directly to a college or university for the 4 years. Some people go to community college first because they have more open admission, so you don't need as strong of an academic background to get into the community college in some cases, or I would say in most cases. And then also it's going to be a little bit less expensive to go to community college. The difference is that most community colleges do not have dormitories. Some do, but I would say the majority do not. So you would be finding your own housing locally, and you'd be dealing with public transportation, which is not a big deal, but you'd want to make sure that it's really available in the community that you're going to. If you go right on to a college or university, then you would be doing the whole 4 years there, as opposed to community college is 2 years and then 2 years more to finish up the bachelor's at a college or university. Beyond that, after you're done with the college or university, you would continue on if you wanted to for a master's. Some programs actually go right from bachelor's to doctorate. Physical therapy is a good example of that. You do your bachelor's in let's say health sciences or exercise science and you're kind of a pre-physical therapy student. You go to physical therapy school, and that's a doctorate program. But many programs do have a master's first. Just kind of depends again on what the program is. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is basically the credits. You typically take about 15 credits or 15 hours of class per semester, 15 to 16 for each semester. So 1 year is about 30 credits or 30 hours of class, 30 to 35, I would say. And then 2 years again would be 60. A full bachelor's is 120 hours, 120 credits. Each of our classes are like 3 hours or 4 hours a week. So you might have a class from 9 to 10 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example. And that'd be your three credit class, 3 hour class. And then you'd have 4 or 5 of those, 4 or 5 classes. Master's degrees vary, but they're typically a 2-year program. That would be about 36 credits or 9 credits or 3 classes per semester. And then doctoral degrees are beyond the master's, another typically 4 or 5 years beyond the master's. Just kind of depends on the program again, but that gives you an idea because the systems might be a little different than what you're used to. So it's important when you're going through this process to use your resources, use what you have at your what you have access to. You may have a college counselor. If you're in a high school that has a college counselor, certainly great resource. You should use them. Do any programming they have, go to any sessions they have, ask them questions. You may have the EducationUSA or the Fulbright office, which is the case that we're doing this session with. They are an incredible resource. I've worked with EducationUSA Fulbright for over 25 years on sessions and on bringing advisors to the US and all kinds of different ways. And I cannot speak more highly, I can't speak highly enough about EducationUSA Fulbright and their services for you as a student. So definitely encourage you to continue. You're using their services by being on this session. And I continue to encourage you to use them for the services they provide. The websites, certainly using the college websites, using college search websites. The one thing is I encourage you not to pay for searches. You shouldn't have to pay any company to do a search for you for admission or scholarship, because you can find all the information yourself. If you want to pay, that's certainly your prerogative, but I don't traditionally recommend it because again, you can find the information for free by just searching. You may use your friends certainly as a resource. Friends can be a great resource. I mean, maybe they've already gone through the process and they're going to help you with some do's and don'ts about going through the process. But remember, this is your journey. This is your search. It's not your friend's journey. It's not your parents' journey. It's not another relative's journey. It's not your boyfriend or girlfriend's journey. This is your journey. You have to make the decision that's right for you because of the time and money that you're going to be investing in it. So there are many, printed and online guidebooks and rankings. Certainly to use them as a guide is perfectly okay. Just remember, there is no national ranking in the US. The US News is not the national ranking for the US. It is simply a publication. They produce the rankings so they can sell the book. They do have some validity. Certainly they are a good resource. They're a good guide, but do not depend on them totally for finding you the best school, because it's something you need to find for yourself. When you get out of college in the US, it doesn't matter so much where you've gone to school. The important thing is that you've gotten you finished the degree and it's what you've done at the school. Now, the hands-on experience, the experiential learning that you could do there, that's really what's going to make you stand out. Because I could go to Hope College or I could go to Michigan State University and I could get a job, coming out of either one. I can get in with a great company. It just depends on what am I presenting to the employer that makes me look better than the next person. Because both schools are very strong. They're very different, but they're very strong. And so, what am I going to show them that is different? And so from Hope, we would, we get students involved in the experiential learning. 93% of our students do experiential learning. So that would be internships or research or study abroad or a combination of more than one of those. So I think that's an important thing to ask your the schools you're looking at is, what's the accessibility of internships and research, depending on your major, which one might be more appropriate, but certainly asking about those possibilities. College fairs, right now, obviously everything's virtual. We wish we could be there with you in person, hopefully soon. I think we're hoping maybe in the spring, but it's still too early to tell that. So I would say the spring or fall of 22, we hope to be back out in person at college fairs. But certainly if you can attend virtual events now, it's a great time to have some, even if it's just some chat room conversation with some college reps to find out, to get some of your questions answered. And then finally, obviously, in the future, again, meet with the U.S. representatives that come over. It doesn't have to be a college fair setting. It could be coffee with them. It could be, meeting at your school, whatever the case might be. And for right now, it's meeting virtually. But most of us are more than happy to do Zoom meetings with you and your parents, you and other classmates, whatever might work. So just a few things here, because we've talked about most of them, but finding the right match is just important. So we've talked about academics and the school having strong academics, but also having academics that you're interested in. We also talked about location and how that might or might not be a concern for you. Size, again, size might matter, it might not matter. Because it's the size of the school has a factor in your overall education because of the size of the classroom, your interaction with faculty, those kind of things. Public versus private, personal opinion is there's not much difference because it's something that's on the back end that you don't see that causes one to be a public or a private. It's that funding from the state government. The campus culture is going to be different from one to the next. So Hope is a Christian college. We welcome students from all faiths. We have many, many different faiths represented, and we're representing most of the states in the US and over 25 foreign countries. But that might create a different culture on campus than kind of a big public university. Just kind of depends on what you're looking for. Selectivity is a big deal. Selectivity is, how selective is that school? Hope is considered to be very selective, but like an Ivy League is highly selective. And what does that mean? Well, the percentage of admission is really low. So at an Ivy League school, less than 10% of their applicants are admitted. If you look at a small private like Hope, we might admit 70% of our students, but we're also, that's 70% of those that complete the whole application process. We're weeding out students in the process of, go all the way through the admissions process. We talk to students about, whether this is a good match for them academically, financially, et cetera. And if it's not, then they may choose to cancel their application. Those don't factor into that acceptance rate. So if we included those, our acceptance rate would be much, much lower. We talked about weather. We just mentioned size a minute ago. And then obviously the programs are crucial, that they have programs that you're interested in, and they're strong in those programs. So there we go. Sorry, so this just gives you an idea of some of the four-year schools in the US. These are just some samples, right? And this is a little bit old, so it's a couple of years old, but it gives you an idea of, first of all, the little graph that shows the colors, that's the number of colleges within the state. So you can see Michigan is that kind of that orangish color, the middle one, and we have 50 some universities, and that falls right in that 40 to 60 range. But you see that California, Texas, Illinois, Pennsylvania, all have like over 100 colleges and universities. So there's a lot of different options out there, and it also gives you kind of some of the tuition prices, at least as of a couple of years ago, tuition prices of some of these universities. That's not total cost, that's just tuition per year. So let's go on to the next one. And again, another way, and sorry, this is a little bit blurry, but it gives you, again, on the private side or liberal arts colleges, the bigger the bubble is, the more liberal arts colleges are there. So you see that like California has quite a few. Pennsylvania has quite a few with 20. New York has quite a few with 14. So, I mean, there's some different schools that have a lot of the liberal arts or private liberal arts colleges too. But notice there's a lot of states that don't have necessarily private colleges. You'll see them that they have no yellow indicator at all. But they are concentrated in this east half of the US, very highly concentrated. So let's look at the application process. We're moving through this presentation pretty quickly, and I want to make sure there's time for questions and answers at the end, but let's look at the application. So Schools in the US will accept the Common App, and or they might have their own institutional application. You don't have to do them both, but they may offer you the option of doing one or the other. For example, at Hope, we do accept both, but our Hope College application, there is no fee attached to it. So that would be free to apply. So that's great. They're going to look for your official academic transcripts. So they're going to look for something from secondary school. And then if you've attended any universities after secondary school, they would be looking for that transcript as well. If you're applying to a school that has a graduate program, master's or doctorate, they're probably not going to ask for the secondary school documents. They're just going to ask for your university documents. Standardized test. Now, many US schools are test optional now because of COVID. So the SAT or ACT with many schools are not currently required. However, you just see toward the bottom of the list, there's the English proficiency exam. And that, is normally required unless you've been taught totally in English. And then some schools will waive that requirement if you've been taught totally in English or English is your first language. Other things that might be required, letters of recommendation, a statement of purpose or an essay or personal statement. And then potentially, especially for graduate studies, a curriculum vitae or a resume or something where you can list out your experience and your education, everything on one page that a graduate school might want to see. So the different forms of admission really quickly are rolling admission, early action, early decision. So rolling admission means basically they're making decisions just as your application gets complete. Within a certain period of time, they're going to get you a decision. If a school has early action, that just means that if you apply by a certain deadline, so for example, Hope College does have early action in the fall. So if you apply by November 1, we will get you a decision by the 3rd week in November. That's our first big round of decisions. Early decision, on the other hand, is a very, it's a process where you're actually committing to the school. I guess what you're saying basically is, if I get admitted to this school, I'm going to go there. I'm going to accept their offer and I'm going to go. I know I can afford it. I'm going to go. Because if you get accepted by an early decision, if you apply and get accepted by an early decision school, you're at that point supposed to withdraw all your other applications. Because by applying early decision, you're saying, if I get in, I'm going there. Okay, so it's a very important decision. I don't encourage students to do early decision unless they are absolutely positive that that's the school they're going to go to and they can afford it. There's no problem. They're going to be able to go. Then I think certainly it's a great option. But I think otherwise you're making a really early commitment. And if you're not sure about where you want to go, that's probably not the best commitment to make at that stage. There is the non-competitive versus competitive admission. I think most US universities have some level of competitive admission, but some are more highly competitive than others. So the Ivy League schools, as I mentioned earlier, are probably the most competitive schools to get into in the US, and other schools that are kind of like them are highly competitive. On the other end, as I mentioned earlier, the community colleges are typically non-competitive. They may not have a minimum requirement. They may just say you have to have graduated from secondary school, but it doesn't matter what your grade average is. You can come to community college. There might be some that do have some kind of a minimum GPA. So it's important to ask that question. So how are our decisions made? At a non-competitive institution, there's not a lot to the decision. It may just be that you finished high school and you're able to show that you can pay for your education, and that's enough. Sometimes they'll have a minimum GPA, but it's really low, minimum grade average. A competitive institution will have typically a minimum average that you have to get. They may not advertise it necessarily. On their website, they might have a mid 50% range. So they might say the mid 50% of our students have a grade average between a 3.2 and a 3.7 out of 4 or something like that. And they might do the same range for the SAT if they require it. So they will not admit all the students that apply. There will be students that get denied admission to a competitive institution, but then there's also a very highly competitive that a greater number of students are getting denied because all of the students, or the majority of the students that apply to a highly competitive school, are going to be the very top students. So Ivy League schools will deny perfect students with perfect grades, because there are so many students that apply to them that have perfect grades. They can't admit everybody. So it will be, there will be students that certainly are very disappointed when they don't get into the first choice. Whether it's a competitive or a highly competitive school, doesn't matter. If you have good qualifications and you don't get in somewhere, that's very frustrating. But it does happen. So let's look real briefly. I want to mention secondary admission, because some of our majors that we have, like education, engineering, nursing, those would sometimes business, but not usually. Sometimes a secondary admission, in other words, sometimes they say that you have to come to the college or university first, take some prerequisite courses, and then apply to the major. Okay, when you apply to a U.S. school, you're typically applying to the institution, not to the major program. So you apply to Hope College, you're applying to Hope College. You're not applying to the business program. You're applying to Hope College. That's the case with most schools. There are some of them are, some institutions do have direct admission into an academic program if you're extremely qualified. And so like a Purdue University, Purdue is in Indiana, and they have a really strong engineering program. So, you could check and see, do you at Purdue offer, a direct admission into engineering, or do I have to come and do prerequisite classes first? That's a great question to ask. I think you'd find that more of these direct admission opportunities are going to be at the bigger universities, not at the small private schools. Most schools, you're going to come do the prerequisites and then apply to the program. Some of them have a limited number they can enter, and others, it's really not limited. You just have to have the prerequisites done. And also, in addition to the prerequisites, they might say you have to have a certain grade point average as well in those classes. And it's usually that secondary admission usually happens in the second year, maybe first semester of the third year, but typically second year of university, you would do that secondary admission, because that gives you time to take those prerequisite classes. With engineering, it's going to be math and physics. I mean, that's the main ones they're going to, and then there's like an intro to engineering course. Sometimes these subjects will give you an intro course that's really tough. And the reason why is they're trying to weed out the students that are not serious about studying in that subject area. So it could be an intro to engineering class, and it could be that, half the students that take that don't end up going into engineering because they realize it's not what they thought it was going to be. And engineering is a pretty tough area to study too. So what are the next steps? Besides the application itself and the academic transcripts, which we talked about, there's also verification of financial support. So as part of the U.S. application process and the U.S. immigration process, you have to show that you have financial support for your education. Usually the amount you have to show is whatever the balance is from the overall cost, the overall annual cost, minus scholarship that they might offer. And that gives you the amount that your family contribution, that's how much you guys are going to pay. So you have to show that you have verification of financial support for that amount. Once you're admitted, there may be an enrollment deposit. Sometimes sometimes you get that back once you arrive, and sometimes it's just a non-refundable deposit that you never see again. For example, ours is $300, and 150 of it goes on as a credit on your account. So if you come and enroll, it's actually shows up as a credit on your account, and the other 150 is a housing deposit of our overall 300. And the 150 deposit, once you leave housing after your third or fourth year of living there, if you leave no damages, then we would give you the $150 deposit back. There's also, related to housing, there'll be paperwork too. So you'll have to file housing paperwork at some point in the process. Most of these things, verification of financial support happens kind of in the middle of the cycle, the middle of our school year. Enrollment deposit is usually by May 1. And housing deposit might even be earlier, sometimes depending on, usually it's May 1, but if they have limited housing, they may say, hey, you need to have even if you don't know you're coming for sure, you need to have your housing paperwork in by March 1st or something like that. Doesn't commit you to staying there, but it does say that, hey, if I come here, I'm going to need housing. So that's what you're telling them. And then, of course, when we get closer to the day, a couple of months before you arrive, you would be going for the visa interview. That would be for your F1 student visa. And then when you arrive, most schools have an orientation, specifically many times for international students and U.S. students who lived abroad. And this orientation is a great way to get used to the campus, get used to things that are in the community before all the other students arrive. So orientation can be a very important and very helpful part of the process just before you start classes. So I think cost and affordability is one of the last things I want to mention. It's, you know, learning about each school and what are the annual cost, what is the annual cost of attendance, including living expenses. What is the actual cost that's going to be to live there? And they're going to tell you that because you have to be able to show the financial support to show that you do have the ability to pay the costs after scholarship. But I think it's also important that you talk to your family about this ability to pay. What are your parents able to pay per year? What is their budget? Because you don't want to spend a lot of time looking at schools that you can't afford. But part of the question too is, what does the college offer in the form of scholarship? I'll show you our options in just a second, but every school could be a little bit different. So merit scholarships are the most common, and then other types of scholarships related to volunteering or leadership or some other type of involvement. That's the next most common. Need-based scholarships are not that common, but are out there. So some schools do offer some kind of need-based scholarships. They're usually small. And then the final thing that's really hard to get and hard to come by in the US for international students is loans. So you're really not going to be able to get loans in the US unless you have a relative or friend in the US who's going to co-sign a loan with you at a bank. And it's going to be kind of a high interest loan. So that's usually not an option. Usually you've got whatever the colleges offer you in scholarship, and then your family pays the balance per year. So I mentioned need-based aid. That's the one that's pretty rare. I mentioned academic, and usually that's based on transcript and test scores. There's the potential at some schools, the bigger schools, for athletic scholarship. Highly competitive. You have to be a national level, regional to national level athlete to be considered for a scholarship in the US. There are just so many students trying to get these from all over the US and then worldwide that you really have to have a very high level of talent. And the school has to be able to offer them. Like, not all schools. The small privates like Hope, we're what's called a Division III school. Division III is part of the NCAA, part of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, like these bigger schools. But Division III schools cannot offer scholarship. They're not able to offer scholarship for athletics. One other one I want to mention is the non-academic merit, like dance, music, theater, or what we would call the talent awards. So dance, music, theater, and art. We do offer, for example, at Hope, up to $3,000 for students that are talented in these in dance, theater, art, music, and actually creative writing is another one. And for us, you don't have to major in one of those areas to get a talent award. You just have to participate. So it might be that you play violin really well and you audition, and we want to offer you a $3,000 scholarship to play in the orchestra, to play your violin in the orchestra, for example. So again, not having to major in it, but you can participate. However, you can major in the fine arts. That's certainly possible as well. So just a few things, this is one screen before I tell you a little bit about Hope, and then we'll open to questions. Some surprises for international students were our American students are very success oriented, very competitive. Two, the classroom tends to be very informal, and faculty, you'll see faculty all over campus. You'll talk to faculty all the time, especially at small schools. The professors can be very young looking occasionally, and they can be very casual. You might see in some parts of the country, younger faculty could come in a shirt and shorts. I mean, that's not unheard of. Then depending on the subject area, right, and where you are in the country and how old the professor is. The professors are very polite, and the kids are polite, and sometimes the instructions are very indirect. In other words, sometimes you really have to look into what they're asking you to do. It's not always a direct request. It's sometimes things you have to infer from what they've said. I'm also culturally diverse. Most of our campuses are very culturally diverse. Our communities are, and that's our effort. That's our goal, is to have that, right? So let's look at ours really quick. So we are participating in the campus scholarship program, CSP, with EducationUSA Fulbright. And then the other one we have is International Student Scholarship. It's merit-based. It's up to $25,000. That's renewable for 4 years, and we award that at the time of admission. The deadline for being considered for that is normally April 1, unless we fill up before then, but typically April 1. And finally, I wanted to mention Hope Forward, which is a new project that our president has started. It's a separate, you have to be admitted first. I didn't put that on there, but you have to be admitted to the college first. So go through that admissions process really quick. And then there's a separate application for Hope Forward. It is highly competitive, but if you were a recipient, you would get to attend Hope College tuition free for 4 years. There are 20 students to be selected next year for the fall of 22. They're all first-year college students. Recipients pledge to donate back to Hope College annually after they graduate, and there's no specific amount of money that you need to donate. You donate at the level that you're comfortable with at that time in your life. And it's for as long as you're able to give. So for as many years as you will give back to Hope. That's all the money goes back into Hope Forward. It's kind of a pay it forward concept. So in this case, you're getting the education first, and then you're paying later to assist students who will come later and get the same opportunity. Again, the goal is not saying you have to pay back what we gave you in tuition money. That's not the point. The point is just to give back at the level you're comfortable with on an annual basis. So that is the presentation. It was, we fit a lot into over 45 minutes. So hopefully we still got you all online. But this is my contact information, just crawley@hope.edu and our website of www.hope.edu. I'm open to all kinds of questions, whether they be general questions or questions about Hope College specifically. You can find our scholarship information on our website, including the Hope Forward Scholarship. And you can also email me about that. So I'm going to go.